Good morning, everybody. I'm John O'Loughlin, and welcome to my channel. It's called McDuff Lives. And this morning, I'm throwing in an extra show, as just to remind you, I've been only doing 5 shows a week this past month or two, recovering from taking a lot of time to write the book about my dad, which is called McDuff Lives with an exclamation point, and you can get that at Amazon on Kindle, or you can get it by just going to our website of screamingospreys.com. And I do encourage you to do that. Get the Kindle version. I don't have a printed version to offer to you. Not sure when that'll happen, but I do think you'll benefit a lot if you do take advantage of reading the book. You can get the Kindle version and print it out and make a notebook with 3 ring binders and whatever. But I do ask you to try to read the book. So enough said on that. Um, what we're doing this morning is reading from a book written and published in 1976. And I was totally unaware of it. And although I'd heard the name Carl Oglesby as an author, I'd never looked into his work. So this is one of those examples that I often run into where I myself have been trying to put together a some thoughts or a show or an essay or a book about a subject. And as I'm working on it, I realize that there's somebody else has already done that. So I'm just going to kick back and read their book. Hello, everybody. Hi. Thanks for coming to see us here on a surprise Monday morning show. 11 o'clock here on the East Coast, U.S. And welcome wherever you are. Tyrone, um, being here. I like that name. Pardon me. See behind me, my bookshelf has a picture of my dad, and then a angel in front of that, and then uh, the next is Beethoven, a small little bust of Beethoven in honor of our work with the great David Shavin and talking about Beethoven, Mozart, and Schiller and the American Revolution last Friday. Very interesting to me. And it looks like it was to you too. We've got over 500 views on that show already. We also have over 500 views on part one of this book, which I again did by surprise yesterday morning at 11 a.m. or 10 a.m. on a Sunday, just because I was inspired. And I am continue to be inspired by this book. The next chapter, I think, is one of the most important finds that I've made from this book so far. It's chapter 2, and I'm going to try to get through the whole chapter. We'll see how far we get. But when you see the the themes that he puts into this book, into this chapter, you'll see how important that is to me because it really gives context in a way that I had only suspected, but now we have it in black and white, so to speak. So let's turn to our book for the day. And here we go. Clandestine America. 3 sources. What is actually possible on the stage of American politics? Can presidents be assassinated by conspirators who go free and win out in the end? Are events which the media soberly report on often little more than play shows contrived by Machiavellian power elites for the manipulation of mass consciousness? Well, there's a speed bump for me. I have to stop right there and say, here in 1976, he saw what we're going through right now, because we're looking at these events and saying, is that a false flag? Or in George Webb's great phrase, is that a school play? And we certainly do have Machiavellian power elites, but I'll be darned if I can give you a complete table of organization and personnel. And as the great folklore character Utah Phillips says, the world it is not destroying itself; it's being killed, and the people who are doing it have names and addresses. And I think that's really true. It resonates from a person basically that I would identify with the liberal side or the progressive side of things. Um, uh, an iconic folk singer and a man that really I think loves America, and we all purport to love America. So we've got to do the homework. And once again, let's turn back to Carl Oglesby's 1976 work, the next paragraph. Even after Watergate, the idea that there may be a clandestine American state vastly predating Nixon's arrival in the White House, transcending Nixon and lingering beyond him, will seem too wild, will seem to go too far, unless we come upon it as the wind and the rain fashioned the thing itself, bit by bit. The following three stories about how that happened could be followed by 30 more rather like them. I'm not trying to be definitive or exhaustive, only to exemplify the steps taken, now well behind us, that pointed us down the path toward Dallas and Watergate, toward COINTELPRO, chaos, garden plot, and the secret state. 1. The long-term penetration of the American foreign policy bureaucracy by a secret group of Anglophiles operating worldwide as the Round Table. Yeah. 2. The so-called Operation Underworld of the World War II years, a secret but evidently formal and binding compact linking the federal police apparatus and the crime syndicate of Meyer Lansky. Wow, huh? And 3, and this is the one that totally astonished that he's done this in 1976, but here it is. The secret submission of the United States World War II command to the astonishing demands of Nazi Germany's top spy master, General Reinhard Gehlen, who leapt from Hitler's sinking general staff to become unrivaled chief of American, West German, and NATO intelligence systems in the Cold War years. So this is not something that, John O'Loughlin discovered and, George Webb and I got on the trail of it and started turning over rocks. These rocks have been turned over, but nobody paid attention. This is why I never heard of this book before. So this is a gold mine, in my opinion, and that's why I'm taking the extra effort of doing two shows in a day to make sure that I get this book out there, at least the parts of it that I find to have all this gold in them. So the three things would be the Anglo-American establishment, the Carol Quigley material with the Rhodes Roundtable, which is a huge, huge influence. Secondly, the Operation Underworld, which was when the supposedly the Office of Naval Intelligence made a deal with Lucky Luciano, and our author is going to explain to us how naive it is not to realize that that was Franklin Roosevelt, not just the ONI making that deal. Um, and then thirdly, the Fort Hunt Agreement, which was something that I had been studying at the time that I was meeting with George Webb for the first time, and we went through a number of shows talking about the importance of what appears to have been a real binding agreement between Reinhard Gehlen, on behalf of his um, Nazi intelligence service that supposedly had penetrated the Soviet Union and all the Eastern European countries, and the United States government. And that, of course, was done through the CIA. So here you have an incredible illustration of the depth of this war between the Cowboys and the Yankees. And the Cowboy side is clearly the FBI side, and the Yankee side is clearly the CIA side. So it's like I've said in my book, when I tried to make this point in my book had, about my dad has three parts: the Navy, the FBI, and then the Pentagon, Joint Chiefs of Staff. And in each of those parts, my father is operating on the side opposite or against or defending against the CIA. So that's a consistent thing that we can see in my dad's career. But then consider that my dad, having been one of Hoover's most important people, was on the front lines in all three of those scenarios. So he would have known the Navy's interest and the intrigues that were going on. Obviously, the Navy and MacArthur didn't agree, but MacArthur was able to create his own Navy as out of parts of the Navy, including my dad. To what extent did my dad become a MacArthur man while he was on the Nashville with him? I don't know. But my dad was perspicacious. He would have been listening. He would have understood that there was this intelligence war going on. And then in the FBI, obviously, you have the FBI often catching CIA people doing things, and that is all secret. But my dad was chasing Russians up and down Indian Head Highway where we lived. What Russians? Soviets? That's what we're told. Cassidy's Run informs us about this, about how the FBI was using all the tools of spycraft. In fact, Hoover said, the FBI is not really a crime fighting agency, it's an intelligence agency. So that was my dad working intelligence for Hoover. But then, of course, at the Joint Chiefs, you have the old cowboy mentality of the uh, the real war fighters, and then you have the brain trust mentality of a Robert McNamara, and the clash between them comes to blows. And my dad is one of the people in the line of fire. So this stuff is all very, very close to my work. And everything I've read here does underpin my own suspicions all along, which is that Reinhard Gehlen has been a tremendous influence. I mean, if not the dominant factor in our foreign policy towards Europe and Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union, and that has been permitted by our State Department and our CIA. Let me read some more. Page 15. But as these narratives will be appreciated better in view of their distance from standard ideas, we will first take up two other responses to this question, one by a conservative CIA sophisticate, Miles Copeland, a retired CIA official, and the other by his liberal counterpart, Andrew St. George, a journalist specializing in CIA themes. The Copeland piece appeared in the October 1973 issue of William Buckley's National Review. St. George's piece came out a month later in Harper's. Both articles were cited in the report of Senator Howard Baker's special Watergate subcommittee looking into the CIA's role at Watergate. Both writers were questioned in secret by congressional investigators. And as we shall see, despite their conservative liberal opposition, the men are ideological bookends. Both assure us, I almost said reassure, that in terms of big brotherism and the police state, things will be getting worse. Copeland opens his explanation of clandestinism in the United States politics by setting out a picture of concatenating world scale disasters mounting over the coming years and battering with cumulative force against the foundations of human society everywhere. He sees this process of breakdown as leading inevitably to the worldwide escalation of left wing terrorism. In response to this forthcoming contagion, the governments of the world, one after the other, will be forced to the use of totalitarian methods of social control. Watergate gives us, he says, a slice of life look at the way these forces were developing. Parentheses, that is, shows us that Nixon was provoked to the police state by those who opposed him. The inevitability of terror in a collapsing situation culminates in the inevitability of a Gestapo response. Quote, the only answer to the problem of terror, Copeland writes, seems to be to keep whole communities under surveillance. This means we are subscribing to police state methods, says Mother, but what else can we do? Unquote. Copeland does not stop to consider that for some of us this might not be a self-answering question, or whether person for person it might not be braver and better for a people and a society to endure terror, if that is indeed the only alternative, than to countenance tyranny. The point he is in a rush to make is that for the ruling classes, and with whom he identifies, it is better to impose a police state than to suffer a revolution. He is also saying that even in the United States, the people will tolerate or welcome this police state as the only alternative to revolution. Quote, with intelligence on the people's war pouring in as it presently is, unquote, he writes, even the most liberal minded CIA officers feel that they have no choice but to do whatever is necessary to deal with it. Whatever, emphasized by Copeland. They believe that sooner rather than later, the public will swing over to sharing the alarm and will become suddenly unsqueamish about police state methods or whatever it takes to give them a good night's sleep. The CIA, the FBI, and other security agencies had better be prepared. They had better have in readiness methods of, quote, community surveillance, unquote, which have in them only such invasions of privacy as are absolutely necessary, and which ensure that the invasions are handled with such discretion and delicacy that even the most ardent liberal can't object to them. These still to be demonstrated, quote, methods, as Copeland airily calls them, are at the same time, so he assures, essentially benign, in some respects benevolent, and efficient in implementation. Quote, the FBI has a comparatively simple problem, he writes, provided it can be assured of freedom from political influences. It can easily administer a system of community surveillance which will be pervasive enough to check terrorist influences in the United States, yet not constitute more than a minor departure from our traditional way of doing things, unquote. All right. I have a couple of comments about this. First of all, let's recognize that this this dynamic is timeless, has been going on for centuries and millennia. And that is, if the people feel oppressed at a certain point, they'll reach a breaking point and they'll say, hey, we're going to have to change the government. But the people who are ensconced and who've got their nice living and they're comfortable and they've got their savings and their kids are in best schools and everything is nice and comfy for them, say, no, we can't have a revolution. What are you crazy? Well, you just destroy everything. And so they say, what we need to do is kind of infiltrate this revolution thing and make sure that it doesn't ever actually happen. So we'll send some people out there that'll keep it under control and listen and spy on these you know so-called community safety meetings or whatever these people are doing. With the Committee of Safety, if you recall from the American Revolution. Yeah, what are they really doing? Let's go spy on them. Let's make it impossible for people to feel secure in a community meeting because it'll be obvious at some point that everything you try to do is going to get back to Big Brother. And there you have it. The elites are going to at some point say, "Hello, Big Brother, we want you. Come on in." And the question is, can they persuade enough of the rest of the people to go along with it? Now, this brings up the question of January 6th and what's really is the importance of January 6th. If you recall, our author says that inevitably there's going to be left wing violence. There's going to be left wing, and we've seen that, right? We've seen the Antifa and all that. And that is to condition the elites to accept totalitarian, quote, community uh, control. Well, now the tables are turned. The Eastern establishment, you know, Joe DuPont Biden is now in the White House. And they want to impose the totalitarian state. Whereas the people that voted for Trump are against it. So, what does January 6th add to this dynamic? Ah, bingo, it's violence on the right. Look, the people on the right are going to destroy everything we built. There's going to be a revolution. They're going to tear everything down. And so we, the noble holders of the liberal tradition in this country, are going to swallow a slightly bitter pill and invite Big Brother to come in and take care of that, because we can't have a revolution for goodness sakes. What if we lost all of our um, stock, and what if we lost our 401ks? What if we lost, all the investments? So you don't want to see your economy shaken, no matter which side you're on, right? And so this is what January 6th means to me. It means to me that they're going to keep rattling that January 6th, holding that bloody shirt, right? Look, it's the bloody shirt. The Republicans are insurrection. And the reason is that this psychological ploy works. It works scaring rich Republicans of Antifa, and it works scaring rich liberals of grassroots Republicans. Page 17. Thanks to the Seymour Hersh New York Times disclosures of Christmas 1974 showing a vast CIA-run domestic intelligence activity, we now understand, of course, that the presumptively futuristic scenes promoted by Copeland wherein the CIA enters massively into domestic intelligence operations to stop some future crescendo of terrorism, were already old hat when he was writing. Quote, intelligence leans toward keeping discreet track of terrorist groups and neutralizing them quietly, while policemen think in terms of evidence that will stand up in court. He writes, in the future, these distinctions will become less and less important, and extra legal, that is, intelligence actions against terrorism will be closely coordinated with legal police actions against them. Unquote. Nothing futuristic about this at all, as it turns out, all ancient history. Witness the Hoover memos of May 1968, inaugurating a massive program of FBI aggression against the anti war and civil rights movement. Not against, quote, terrorism, by the way, but against dissent, against a rival political standpoint. Witness the Houston Plan and Operation Gemstone and Octopus and all the rest that came with the succession of Nixon to the Johnson throne. We have a concrete sequence of repression, of the use of police state methods, exactly along Copeland's lines, undertaken exactly with his kind of self flattering and historically ignorant posturings about keeping order and giving people, quote, a good night's sleep, as though that were a fit image of a self governing people, a nation asleep. A current failure of Buckleyite conservatism as a serious political philosophy is that it refuses to dissociate itself from this anti constitutional mania for the state financed subversion of political dissent and radical popular movements of reform. It has no values to propose other than that the one single flattened out value of the total security of the state. The more traditional and substantial conservative values of republicanism, limits, and constitutionality are all reduced in the National Review to the one imperious demand for order, silence, sleep. Tyranny was never a remedy for terror. Tyranny is terror. Tyranny and terror promote and multiply each other so well because each is the other's only possible legitimization. But if they are actually the same, as any Socrates could show, then they cannot legitimate each other. The choice between terror and totalitarianism is a choice that can only be made, can only be identified as a choice by terrorists and tyrants. The Democrat, the Republican, and the Independent among us will not be so quick to see terror and tyranny as opposite alternatives, but only as two sides of one coin, a single composite choice against liberty and humanity. The authentic rejection of terror mandates the rejection of tyranny. I would like that printed on a big sign and put everywhere. The authentic rejection of terror mandates the rejection of tyranny. This is why I like good writers. That's memorable. There is no way to defend the democracy by the use of anti democratic means. There is no anti Republican method corresponding to a Republican purpose. There is no furtherance of a national and personal, political and social independence through submission to national police controls. Thank you for saying that in 1976. Because this is exactly what the world needs to remember right now. The state cannot, at the same time, uphold the law and trample it underfoot. The liberal survey of the same forces, however, is disquietingly similar, as Copeland finds totalitarianism necessary, Andrew St. George finds it irresistible. too enlightened to fall back on Copeland's all-vindicating menace of red terror and the legitimating raison d'etre of the clandestine American police state, St. George rather sees a monster he calls techno-fascism as emerging from the material conditions of ultra-modern production, from the computerization of everyday life. His position is sociologically sophisticated. He borrows knowledgeably from the Weberian literature and incorporates the pessimism of current observers like Jacques Ellul and Hannah Arendt without a trace of unconfidence. St. George calls Watergate, quote, the poisonous afterbirth of Vietnam, an end to external conflict, the inward turning of the nation's aggressions, the unmistakable first step towards genuine convergence with our erstwhile totalitarian opponents. He quotes Patrick McGarvey's 1972 work, The CIA, the Myth and the Madness, quote, United States intelligence is now turning inward on the citizens of this country. The next logical step would be for an administration to do exactly what its people suspected of doing, start mounting intelligence operations against citizen groups and assemblies, unquote. Richard Nixon and John Mitchell, continues St. George, may have been instinctively, if not consciously, motivated toward Watergate by an intuitive sense that the era of foreign intervention was drawing to a close. Parentheses, he is writing before the exposure of the CIA Chile connection, that reference to IT&T being supported in its coup by the CIA. From now on, America would have to generate the climate of defactualization and policeness. St. George finds the Hannah Arendt coinage useful right at home if it wanted continued progress toward fully achieved, seamlessly engineered, cybernetically controlled techno-totalitarianism. What he's referring to is, in terms of defactualization, is something that we don't really, it's not in our general colloquies today. So let me give you the idea. Saying what Hannah Arendt is suggesting, and I don't buy it, but this is the theory, is that in a bureaucratic system, the actual facts that come in at the lowest level work their way up to the top through a maze of competing interests, bureaucratic interests, not personal interests, but interests that work its way through. So when you finally get up after so many layers to the decision maker, the facts have been defactualized. That the story has been changed enough that you can't really call it the same story anymore, and that's what she calls defactualization as a explanation of why bureaucracies do stupid things. Anyway, that's what he's talking about here. Taking as is given the rapid growth in funds and prestige technology available to the national security complex, St. George asks how this complex arose, where it came from, and what history is trying to tell us about it. He writes, technological society is a matter of internal controls. The very concept of national security has changed. Its focus is no longer on spies and seditionists, but on the bureaucracy's internal power arrangements and hierarchical structures. How has this transformation come about? Within a year of the Bay of Pigs, he writes, the CIA curiously and inexplicably began to grow, to branch out, to gather more and more responsibility for the Cuban problem, etc. By the time of the 1965 U.S. military intervention in the Dominican Republic, both the good guys and the bad guys, that is, the radical civilian politicos and the conservative generals, turned out to have been financed by La Compañía, the company. Owing largely to the Bay of Pigs, the CIA ceased being an invisible government. It became an empire. Now he approaches a mysterious question. The agency had become a tireless data digger and interviewer and fact collector about the smallest details of life in Cuba under Castro until the landing preparations began in earnest in early 1961. Then intelligence collection began to drop off. The operators took over. It seemed that when the operational side of the agency cut in, the intelligence side cut out. It was baffling. The real question was why? Why did CIA intelligence cut out of the Bay of Pigs invasion at roughly the moment Kennedy was inaugurated? And why did CIA operations then cut in? To go to the heart of it, what seems strange on the assumption that the CIA is an integrated bureaucratic entity ceases to seem strange on the assumption, our assumption, that it is a house divided against itself. St. George might have been about to lay this important distinction bare, but he goes wrong. He chooses the path of psychohistorical analysis over the path of political criticism. Well, now I have to stop again. Psychohistorical analysis. Whose word is that? Isaac Asimov. Psychohistory. Psychohistory, the specialty of the mule. The mule being the anti-hero of the Foundation trilogy, written by Isaac Asimov as a scientific pre-programming of our minds to accept a cold totalitarian world in the future, as a way to accept psychological analysis as fact, as a way to promote the psychoanalysis of our nation, as a way to change what we do, what we think of ourselves, how we live our lives. Psychohistorical analysis sounds a lot to me like propaganda, you know? Analyze what people do, use it to shape the future. Arming himself pretentiously with Arendt's magisterial concept of defactualization, that is, information deteriorates upward through bureaucracies, as I said, he sets out to treat the problem of clandestinism as a syndrome belonging to the domain of psychological aberration. St. George knows or surmises that a conflict shoots through the CIA, through the presidency, through the entire executive system, and that effective presidential command and control are the more deeply in doubt the deeper one goes into the heart of the national defense and security establishments. I mean, the more you look at it, the less sure you are that the president is really in control of anything. Yep, 1976. And it's just gotten worse, hasn't it? With bumbling Biden up there signing whatever they hand him, walking past the gate, walking into the bushes. They've got, this is the American equivalent of Queen Anne, if you know what I mean. Then why try to explain breakdowns when they occur as though they were the result of turning away from reality, from empirical data, provable facts, rational truth, toward image making and self deception? Why ignore the overwhelming differentials of policy and faction at play in these breakdowns? It is not Nixon himself, the Joint Chiefs, or the CIA whom Nixon, the Chiefs, and the CIA are deceiving. It is only ordinary people. Nixon knew he was secretly bombing Cambodia. The Joint Chiefs knew they were secretly bombing exempted targets in North Vietnam. The defense and security establishment knew that peace with honor was a slogan and with a hatch in the bottom, and that the peace mandate Nixon would secure with it was pre-structured for easy transmutation into a war mandate. Watergate cannot be reduced to a question of Nixon's personal psychology. He was not deceiving himself, only others. He was not deceiving his class. St. George lets the fashion for psychohistory guide him to the belief that the hero of the story will turn out to have been J. Edgar Hoover. St. George says Hoover distrusted and hated the CIA. Quote, he thought of it as a viperine lair of liars and high domed intellectuals, of insolent Yaleys who sneered at Fordham's finest, of rich young ne'er-do-wells who dabbled in spy work because they could not be trusted to run the family business, of wily Princeton ought himself, Dickie Helms, who spun his Tweedy web from an ultra-modern electronically secured enclave up the river in Virginia. Hoover realized that inevitably, disastrously, the CIA's tainted ways were seeping back home to America. There is a vengeful law of historic osmosis about these things. In other words, as Doug Valentine so brilliantly put it, the Phoenix program is come home to roost. Hoover was proven fatally right, St. George continues, blithely putting his own ideas into the dead director's mind, and altogether overlooking the fact that it was the director himself who already launched in May 1968 a concerted, all-out FBI counterintelligence campaign to expose, disrupt, and otherwise neutralize the activities of the various New Left organizations, their leadership, and adherents. Certainly, Hoover struggled with the CIA about domestic intelligence, just as he opposed the Houston Plan. By the way, the Houston Plan was a plan that was proposed to unify our intelligence agencies domestically and apply the same type of domestic intelligence gathering that we know is going on right now. It just that particular one didn't get adopted, just so you know what it is. But that was because he saw the CIA and the White House as rivals to the FBI, as rival power bases, not because he had suddenly grown sentimental about the Constitution and democracy. Yet St. George's larger point about the growth of the national security complex stands up. Estimated the CIA staff at 150,000 and the total national security budget at $10 billion a year, he confronts the meanings of this with honest emotions. One should pause to absorb this in its full, innovative enormity, he writes. A United States senator tapped and trailed on his legislative rounds by American Army agents. But there are facts and figures to back up the claim. Senator Ervin's other investigating committee, the Subcommittee on Constitutional Rights, revealed last year in a report that went largely unnoticed that by 1969, the Army, not the Defense Department and not the CIA, just the Army, had built up a massive system for keeping watch on U.S. politics. The simple fact is that as the 60s turned into the 70s, America became a nation under surveillance. Pardon me. No doubt, as Copeland's example teaches, the persistence of left wing terror in the world scene will make an easy excuse for totalitarian minded persons. No doubt, As St. George's example teaches, the computerization of everyday life will seem to embody an irresistibly transcendent force. But let us remember that we are actually looking back on the certain knowledge of a clandestine America which these writers can still pretend to see as a future threat, not merely a prognosticated predicament. So we may not be so abstract. We must find the concrete mechanisms, the way into the blind snarls of clandestinism was not led by pious elders seeking to quiet the public sleep or by robots programmed with a contempt for democracy. The way was taken up step by step by ordinary human beings acting under the burden of ordinary human motives. The following three examples will bear out the importance of this innocuous reminder. Well, the next section of the chapter is about the round table, and you will find it fascinating when we get to it. I'm not going to go there now as we're um, approaching the hour of noon. And so I will just leave you with this thought that the people on the right that will invite totalitarianism as a way to free themselves from fear of terror by leftists are the mirror image of the people on the left that will free themselves from the terror of right wing violence by choosing totalitarianism. The author put it very, very well when he said that terror and tyranny are exactly the same thing. And right now, I think we are involving ourselves in both at the same time, where there is terrorism coming at us through our media, trying to frighten us into taking a certain course of action with regard to our health, which we don't know is good or bad because it's not like my doctor called me up and said, "Hey, John, you really got to do this." I haven't heard from my doctor. People that want me to do as they want me to do are not doctors. They're usually friends on Facebook or uh, people like politicians, like our governor. So that to me is a form of terrorism where you push people in a certain direction, and if they don't go there, then you're threatened. You're like, oh, you can't go to the store, you can't go to the restaurant, you can't go to the pharmacy to get some medicine if you have another illness. This is happening around the world right now. Yeah, in English speaking countries, in places where you would think that people love their freedom, but they've been seduced into giving it up because of their fear of a particular virus. Why? Well, that's what we're all trying to find out. But if we look at it like tyranny versus terrorism as the same thing, to me, what that tells me is I would rather face the risk of getting sick than find myself s- the in the position that I can never escape from adherence to the totalitarian state because the whole idea of freedom is that I can make my own decisions about my body. So I reject terrorism and I reject tyranny and I stand upon my rights. Get up, stand up. All right, tonight I'll be talking more about my dad and tying some of the amazing things that I've read recently. Argentina, Nazis, Antarctica, even, to some amazing little hints that I find in my dad's writings to see if we can figure out what they mean. Tonight at 8 o'clock, it's Macduff Matters, Part 6.